The coalition government has put on a show of unity after talk of rocky relations between coalition partners. National says that's all it was, a photo op which failed to paper over the cracks and did nothing to hide the fact that New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters is really the one in control. Jacinda Ardern has come under fire for scheduling media announcements, then pulling back on releasing detail due to last-minute demands from New Zealand First. And yesterday's staged show of unity entitled Our Plan has also been criticised for being short on new detail. Of course, the government says this is business as usual under MMP. Winston Peters says it's the first true MMP government and insisted yesterday that the coalition is not at dysfunction junction. Well, United Future leader and a former leader and coalition government minister Peter Dunne doesn't agree. I asked him a bit earlier in the day how he would describe the past month.
I think it has been a horror month, and I think more importantly it stands in stark contrast to the 6 weeks or so beforehand that Winston Peters was acting Prime Minister. That was pretty calm and smooth against everyone's expectation. I think in a way that's emboldened him to be much stronger in terms of his expectations of the coalition, which is of course contributing to the horror month they've just had.
So you're saying that he's finding it hard to maybe take a back seat. This morning he spoke to Morning Report and said well, he couldn't confirm which seat in the car he was sitting in. What seat do you think he's in?
I think he's at least in the co-pilot seat, if not on the driver's lap.
Okay, what did you make of the weekend's announcement? It's been described as a TED Talk, as an iPhone launch without the iPhone. What did you make of it?
Look, I thought it was a very impressive performance by the Prime Minister, but it said nothing, and it was aimed not at the general public, but it was aimed at a select audience, the three parties in the coalition and their wider supporters. So I thought it was telling in that what it said was really that things are so disjointed and so dysfunctional that we have to put on a show of public unity.
You've had a bit of history here, not just with Mr Peters, but as a minority party that's propped up government on a number of occasions. I want you just to describe for us what's the process like from the coalition agreement to the actual operations of day-to-day government, as you see it happening at the moment with policies that seem to have been agreed beforehand that are always questioned, even at the time of the announcement. Is that how it worked for you?
No, and I think that's the key point, that you have an agreement, you work to implement that agreement, you work with the relevant ministers and officials to give effect to those policies. Then they go through the normal government policy formation process through cabinet committees, the cabinet, etc., then legislation into the House. And they are accepted and agreed by all parties and are progressed as such. What you seem to have at the moment is an additional step, that before they sort of go anywhere after having gone through the formal process, is that there's a further final tick-off by New Zealand First, which might be different to the tick-off they gave earlier on. And that's quite bizarre. You can't work that way. You've got to have good faith, you've got to have no surprises, and you've got to have mutual trust. I think at the moment, none of those things are happening.
You on a couple of occasions, were essential in giving a government a majority in the House. Particularly, I guess we'll go back 20 years to 1998, where National fell apart with went their separate way with New Zealand First under Jenny Shipley. Were you emboldened at that stage by, I guess, the power that you wielded to keep that government in power until the election in 1999? I mean, did you have any greater say after that point in time? Well,
yes, in the sense that the vote was far more important. But I was always conscious of the fact that the vote, whether it be in those situations or as a result of an election, is circumstantial. You don't manufacture it. It happens because of the way the Parliament is constructed. Therefore, you cannot seek to overplay your hand. You've got to respect the authority you've been given by whatever means, and you've got to use it judiciously and responsibly. You can't overplay your hand, because the one thing that happens is a certainty. If you are responsible for bringing a government down as a small party, you pay the price. If, on the other hand, you are seen to sort of obstruct them in their actions, you also pay the price. So it's you win if you do, and you lose if you do as well. So you've got to be responsible. You've got to take one step at a time, and you've got to know your place.
How do you characterise the Greens here? Because they're outside cabinet, and if you look at the party leaders, the one person who seems to be missing in all of this is James Shaw. I mean, he might be quietly going about his work, but for a party that has just one fewer seat in Parliament than New Zealand First, what do you make of their profile, their public profile at the moment?
I feel very sorry for the Greens because they were always Labor's preferred partner. Election circumstances didn't make a Labor-Greens government possible, so they've effectively been just sort of left in the outside room by New Zealand First. I think James Shaw is trying to do his best, but he's hobbled by the fact he's got to support the party-hopping legislation, which is anathema to the Greens. And so I think they're in a very uncomfortable relationship. And I think there'll be a lot of pressure on the Green Party from its own membership, sooner rather than later, to cut and run.
Finally, Mr Dunne, what's your advice to the Prime Minister handling her deputy moving forward?
Well, the Prime Minister needs to remember she is the Prime Minister. She has the ultimate authority. She's got to be seen to be the head of government as much as she might be the actual head of government. She's got to be seen to be in charge. At the moment, she doesn't look as though she is. So I think she's got to assert her authority very clearly, very loudly, and very publicly. And if that means that Mr Peters packs her sad and sort of walks off into the sunset, so be it. Otherwise, she'll be the one doing that because he'll have completely overrun her.
Is this government going to run its course?
I think it probably will, but I suspect it will be a pretty dysfunctional relationship long before then, and I think they'll be quite happy to be put out of their misery at election time.
Peter Dunne, former United Future leader and coalition government minister, putting his point of view forward there.